As you know, there are many buttons to press. We are actively using all of our digits to press them all. So thanks for your patience. All right, and here we are ready to go. Good afternoon, officially, bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue on behalf of Concordia University's Fourth Space. Located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, Fourth Space is activated daily via live events such as this one to create engagement around the various research projects and initiatives, as well as dialogues and development and happening across the university. So to that end, it is our pleasure to collaborate with the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies in Society and Culture to welcome all of you in here today into our virtual space as well as our physical space for the second in a series of conversations on community health, today focused on environment, infrastructure, and public health. So I will be passing it over to CISC Director Mark Sussman in just a minute to get you situated, but before doing so, quickly we'll mention that this meeting, first of all, is being co-moderated by Carmela Cucuzella and Ursula Eker, who are both here with us in the space. We are also in the meeting format, as you've already noticed, and of course this means that you can choose your own viewing adventure, gallery, or speaker view, active speaker. A raised virtual hand and activating your video is a great visual cue for us to call on you throughout this community consultation. So please feel free to do that at any point. And of course, the chat is open for your comments as well. Finally, we are live streaming this to YouTube, and I'll pop that link into the chat now. That's it for me. Over to you, Mark. Welcome in.
Thank you, Anna, and welcome everybody. This is the first of this series of events to be partially live in Fourth Space and partially live via Zoom, and we're getting used to the environment of light, sound, screens, mics, etc. But first, before we begin, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous land. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodian of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, is historically known as a gathering space for many First Nations, and today it's home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. This is, of course, a pressing concern and something that should and will be a key component and a key value of the community health hub of the School of Health as it goes forward, as it comes into being, which is what we're here to talk and brainstorm about a little bit. And in advance, I just want to say I value your contributions and your thoughts. There's an informality to these meetings. And we'll ask you to, when we open things for discussion, to just begin by speaking a little bit about your work and how you see it connecting to the big field of community health. These meetings were called into being by the offices of the Provost and the Vice President, Research and Graduate Studies, Ann Whitelaw and Paula Wood-Adams. And we're extremely lucky to be collaborating with Fourth Space, with Anna, Doug, and Kari. I want to shout out to Brock Deschart, a PhD humanities student who is going to be taking notes in visual format using Miro, and the Miro board will be a tile or a square on your screen if you want to look at it in more detail. Also thanks to Shorig Mikhailian from the OVPGRS who's been helping organize these, and I want to thank today our ASL interpreters, Jody Morrison and Gabby, whose name I didn't learn, but will soon, last name I mean, but thank you Gabby and Jody for being here, helping us. The first of these events took place on January 28th, and focused on the theme of narrative and representation in community health and in health practices more generally. The goal of this meeting today is to think about environment and infrastructure and public health. And in general, I'll just say a word about the school, because I know not everybody maybe is completely aware of where it is in terms of its coming into being at this point. So the School of Health is a new initiative that has been set into motion by Senate at Concordia, by the Board of Governors, by senior administration. It's going to be composed of three broadly defined hubs: clinical research and prevention, biomedical science and engineering, and then community health. And the first two hubs that I've mentioned have identified individuals from our university to serve as scientific directors. There has not yet been identified a community health hub scientific director. So part of what this series is doing is to try to help researchers at the university learn from each other how their work might connect, or how together we might envision what axes, clusters, or other formulations of research might exist under the broad umbrella of community health. So these meetings are to help us discover each other's work. They're to help us conceive of community health broadly, and to foster an interdisciplinary discussion that will lead us to a more concrete version of what community health at Concordia will look like. We're looking for ideas for how to make very concrete connections to communities here in town or elsewhere. And we want to think about the role of environment and infrastructure. So to that end, I asked experts in that field to moderate the discussion today. So I'm very happy Carmela Cucuzella and Ursula Eicher are, as co-directors of the Next Generation Cities Institute, are here. Carmela is going to lead us off as first moderator, and as I'm sure you're all aware, she's also a professor in the Department of Design and Computation Arts, as well as affiliated with Next Generation Cities. So I'll turn it over to you, Carmela. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks to you for tuning in. I know more Zoom is not necessarily what we all need, but so it's much appreciated.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everybody. Very happy to be part of this conversation with everybody here, and thank you for showing up, because we need to have this is the whole idea, is to have your input. So I'll just begin with a very short introduction that I prepared just to get us going in this conversation. So I'll start with the question, so how can designers, engineers, and visionaries think about new forms of infrastructure and planning to engage with health professionals, researchers, and community organizations at both local and global scales? If we consider that community health is a community-driven, multi-sector health ecosystem, it should ensure that everyone has the opportunity to thrive throughout their lives. So community health's most vital role as a steward of population health should guide the seemingly unrelated systems that influence health both at the global and local scales. And so what are these systems? They may be education, policy, infrastructure, transportation, city planning, neighborhood hubs, housing, so from largest to smallest. So all of these often work in silos, should probably start working much more closely if we want to get to an ideal community health system. Public health transformation should shift from a clinical paradigm focused on individuals to a health promoting paradigm focused on communities, where goals extend into a longer-term horizon to create a kind of legacy of caring for future generations. Achieving this large-scale socioeconomic change requires an improved health outcomes that necessitate support and collaboration from the multiple sectors across society. So public health leaders should serve to bring communities, their needs forward and forming the partnerships necessary across these sectors and setting goals with them to improve community health. And this may include all kinds of things, for example, inspiring investment in the city that promotes health, both physical and mental, which is especially necessary in its formal qualities around the city, sharing different kinds of data that are related to health, for example, transport, quality of air, quality of neighborhoods, and in their quality of walkability of neighborhoods, green spaces, public spaces, etc., so that these investments for the city are strategically planned for enabling community health. Shared community indicators will have to be developed that can serve as benchmarks, because we do have to evaluate to some degree the performance against these goals in order that we hold our leaders accountable. And this means, therefore, reframing our approach to measuring public health success beyond disease status to a more holistic view of well-being. And this is where I think, and I don't want to talk for the entire School of Health, that would be a nice way to go forward. So access to humane housing, a thriving natural world around housing and around where people live, basic needs for health and safety in our neighborhoods, meaningful work and wealth for everybody, lifelong learning opportunities, wherever those may be. They don't all have to be in formal, institutions, reliable transportation and belonging, all forming a set of vital health conditions for well-being. So this means that the design of our homes, neighborhoods, and cities that we live in will be done in such a way so that they will foster these better health conditions instead of contributing to the opposite, like asthma and obesity and diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. So the future of health, of public health, is therefore powered by the new local level, with local public health leaders serving as principal health kind of stewards of their communities. And these leaders we should envision form partnerships across sectors with the community members to collect meaningful data about the health of their communities. And I think that there's so much of that going on at Concordia, and I'm hoping that we can bring that conversation, thriving here at Concordia on all these issues. Anyways, so let's just start the conversation. So, I think we all know each other here. So, I mean, normally we would introduce ourselves before asking the question, but I think everybody knows each other.
I'm not sure. I think it would be good if
Okay.
people both introduce themselves, but maybe also said a word about their research and how they see their research connecting to these questions. Because already you've put a lot of things on the table, and I think it would be nice to hear how people, if people feel a connection. Yeah.
Well, I have a few questions, so I'll start with a question just to everybody, and feel free to answer that question or contribute to anything else that you think that may be even more important than the question that is being asked, okay? So how does your research and/or creative work engage with community health, and how might it be helped by connection with other researchers within the hub? And is the idea of a research cluster useful for your work, and how might your work enhance the project of the school? 4 questions, sorry, but all together related. So the floor is yours.
I go first. Hi.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Right. I'm Mohsen Farhadlu, and I'm an assistant professor at John Molson School of Business. I'm in supply chain and business technology management. And in my research, I use business analytics, data mining, machine learning techniques for public health applications. So I've been trying to use social media data in order to measure different health-related outcomes. And I have been working to investigate the application of social media data as complementary to traditional health data. And in my opinion, using the applications of social media, social networks has huge potential to offer for the communities, because many community members these days have social media profiles that can be used in order to study health-related outcomes. And in a recent research project that I'm trying to start, I'm interested in studying the community privacy concerns of people regarding digital contact tracing applications. That has application for controlling infectious diseases such as COVID-19. I think I stop at this point.
Thank you, Mohsen.
I see Carly
Yeah.
had a hand.
Carly?
Sure, hello. Okay, so Carly Zeter, biology faculty. So I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Biology, as well as a member of the Sustainable Cities Cluster at Concordia. And my research I'm primarily an urban ecologist. So my research is focused on understanding patterns of biodiversity and ecosystem services. So the benefits that people get from nature, including benefits for health and well-being in urban environments. And something that I wanted to I guess bring forward here that's relative to cities, but also, much beyond cities in terms of community health, is the really critical role of ecology and ecologists at the table that I haven't seen brought forward very often in terms of discussion of the School of Health. And so if we think about this, environmental factors, air and water pollution, plant-based allergens, high temperatures, all of these factors really negatively impact the health of Canadians, and ecological knowledge is necessary to understand the drivers of those environmental determinants of health and to mitigate their effects. And this is something that we have an incredible wealth of expertise in ecology at Concordia, in terms of urban ecology, but also in terms of wildlife ecology, disease transmission, aquatic ecology, nutrition. And I think that it would be unfortunate if all of that expertise didn't get kind of pulled into the School of Health. And I think the community hub might be a natural place for some of that biology research that's not biomedical research to kind of come in and play a really important role. And so I guess I'm here kind of on a mission on behalf of my colleagues to just say, like, hey, reminder, there are a bunch of ecologists here who work on kind of health related issues, who have really important expertise to bring to the table, but it needs to be clear kind of where we fit in terms of these clusters.
I mean, it's really great. And I would just, I see a couple more hands, but I would just say, if as the conversation unfolds, it would be great to think about how what you're focusing on as an urban ecologist and thinking about kind of physical ecology, how that connects to, for example, what Mohsen just spoke about, which is the social media ecology that we're swimming in and living in, and how can they, reflect each other, support each other. What other forms of research in the humanities or the arts or technology would support, your work being more visible at the table or more, integral. So hopefully we can come back to that. So, thank you.
Gilbert?
Yeah, Gilbert Raymond. Hi. Happy to see you. I do the research as methodologist with vulnerable populations. Often the topics are not classified in health, but it's about access. It's about having people that are vulnerable to have a voice into their possibility to have a place and to have a healthier place in the space. We speak recently of drug users. We speak of how we can develop the arm reduction with something that is more efficient in Quebec with these people in participative research in the field. I did also research a lot of research on homophobia, the factors that are discriminating and creating usually some difference or differentiation into the health of these people. So like Big Brother, I did a research on Big Brother, Big Sister organization impact on the people that are living, that were participating in mentorship, and it's indirectly about health, but all my research are about taking care of the humans, individuals that are neglected by the big mass surveys or research that we do. Yes, thanks.
Thank you. And I think Stephen was up next.
Similar to Gilbert, I guess, is I'm heading a SHIRK partnership grant over the next 7 years, where we're looking at deindustrialization, so the economic sort of crushing of working class communities, and what happens thereafter in terms of social and economic divestment, and very much health is a big part of what's going on when places are relegated, become places of relegation, stigmatization, where there's toxic legacies. And so our main approach is oral history, but also other kinds of research, and so it's sort of from the bottom up. In terms of community health, my worry is that community is very warm and fuzzy, and it's like local equals community, but of course localities are divided. And I'm very much interested in sort of the everyday structural violence that occurs, where we don't even recognize it as violence. So poverty, homelessness, and so on, that are connected to sort of our economy and so on. And so to me, community health has to be, we have to think politically about it as well. And my worry sometimes with community health as a paradigm is that it tends to try to, it doesn't necessarily recognize some of these, points of division. So our project, spans 6 countries and brings in trade unions and indigenous communities and other partners into this work.
Can I just ask? I'm not sure if this is. Steve, how is health conceived as part of this large partnership project? Because deindustrialization is obviously huge, and I'm just wondering how it sort of factors into what you envision or what your partners are working on.
Well, every way, like down to the individual, and the experience of whether it's job loss or living in impoverished communities, what happens then. And so like when you have deindustrialized bodies and the precarity that follows, and economically what happens to people when they are desperate and or have to take the jobs that are available. So precarity and what that does. So it's sort of throughout, but it's not the main frame, I would say, although it permeates everything. And that's why I was really interested in attending today, and I'm curious about what's being planned, because certainly it's a valuable way in. And we certainly know the links between, say, like I live in Point St. Charles, and it was deindustrialized, and in terms of the 24 health districts of Montreal, it's #1 in everything, which is, you don't want to be #1, right? In terms of like cancer,
right,
and all these things. And so the connection's very, very direct. Yeah.
Right.
Can I just
Yeah,
add? Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. Nothing. So thank you very much for that contribution, because those are the kind of ideas that we need to include in this discussion. I mean, we don't have the answers right now. We absolutely don't. So that's why we started off with a little opening statement, thinking that this is a way that we can open the discussion. But this is very important. The idea of deindustrialization and the process and the impacts that has on society, that definitely is a community health issue that has to be part of the discussion, and hopefully the school. So thank you for that. And I just wanted to put that forward. Govind, I think, was next, and then Craig and Megan.
Thank you. My name is Govind Gopakumar. I'm associate professor and chair of the Center for Engineering and Society. I wanted to thank the organizers for inviting me to this workshop. So thank you, Carmela and Mark, and Ursula. I don't quite think of myself as someone who works in the health area. And so when this invitation came around, I got myself thinking of, are there kind of health related outcomes that connect with my work? And a lot of my work looks at environmental infrastructures. So I've done some work on kind of the politics of water supply, and now more recently on politics of automobility and our car cultures that we have in our cities. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I think our environmental infrastructures clearly have outcomes that are health related, not directly, because for example, in our car oriented societies, there are individuals who have more sedentary lifestyles, could potentially be more unhealthy. But also, I think there are environmental justice kind of related questions associated with how our cities are increasingly, especially in the global south, which is where much of my work is, how increasingly cities are being reordered to, their streets are being reordered to support particular forms of mobility, car-oriented mobilities. So I think the point that I'm trying to make would be that in thinking about questions of community health, I think it's also important to recognize questions of how justice and sustainability kind of intersect with that, and I think the intersection of those factors, the kinds of logics and politics, I think that would be interesting for me to explore. Thanks.
Thank you, Govind. Craig?
Hi, thank you, Carmela and Mark, for inviting me. I'm the chair of the Department of Geography, Planning and Environment, and we have no one really directly studying health, but a lot of people studying climate change, and a lot of people studying the form and functioning of cities and urban growth. And so broadly, there are a lot of researchers in this department concerned with questions of sustainability, environmental futures, environmental determinants of health. I myself study urban infrastructure and urban rapid transit infrastructure, and the forum of cities, which are closely linked with health. So we have a number of people, myself, Jochen Jaeger, Pierre Gauthier, who study the forum of Canada's cities, and a lot of that forum is relatively dispersed and sprawling settlement patterns, which involve a high level of use of automobiles, and then a lot of negative consequences of that related to accidents, collisions, emissions, and energy use and the associated impacts then of this relatively low density and dispersed form of settlement. And then we have researchers, most prominently Damon Matthews, but others as well, studying climate, the changing climate, which is obviously going to have impacts on people's health. And we also have now an urban ecologist studying urban ecology. So we have a lot of expertise in this area, and we'll be looking for ways that I can get involved myself, but that my colleagues can get involved in these efforts. So thank you.
That's great.
Thank you. Did you want to say something about the climate change related? No, okay. I just wanted to add though, Craig, thank you for that. And also for Govind before, but I did want to add that, you know, when Ursula and I and Matthias went to COP26 in November last year, health-related issues regarding climate change impacts, whether it is, you know, from all over. It's not only about, you know, buildings and cars, it's at all levels, extraction of oil and petrol, at all levels. The health impacts are huge. And these were the voices that were really trying to be heard at COP26. And so I thank you for bringing that up, because even though climate change seems to be there, but it's, you know, right center, it's a bit like what Carly was saying with the urban ecologists and the green spaces and the biodiversity, et cetera, they're important issues that have a huge influence on health in the city and through the infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you, Craig. I think it's Megan.
We have Megan and Cynthia and Janice. Yeah. So, yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for organizing this. Megan Choi, I'm an assistant professor of political science. And I do a lot of research on aging in cities, and particularly how local governments, but also how other levels of governments are responding to older adults. So I do research on aging in place and how this Age-Friendly Cities program is sort of supporting that. And I have a couple of research projects that are affiliated with the Quebec government. They're Action Concertée projects. And one of those departments is the Ministry of Health. And some of the projects that I'm working on are looking at how particular groups of marginalized older adults are really falling through the cracks of different kind of programs and policies at different levels of government. So for instance, older adults that are leaving the prison system, older adults have experienced homelessness, older adults with precarious immigration status. And I think what these projects are really looking at is how all of these policies at different levels really aren't speaking to each other and are fundamentally marginalizing in a lot of ways. And also, the other piece that interests me here is kind of the role of the nonprofit sector, who's actually delivering a lot of these services and support, such as housing services, immigration and settlement services, and this sort of thing. And so I guess I'm here to kind of bring that policy and politics piece in. And yeah, just issues around coordination and that kind of thing. So I'll sort of leave it there.
Maybe Cynthia?
Okay. I hope you can hear me. There's buttons flying out all over the place.
Loud and clear.
Perfect. All right. Hi, everybody. Great to see you. Some of you I haven't seen in person for 2 years, so this is actually thrilling. So yeah, I mean, you gave us a great list of things to think about at the very beginning, Carmel, and they're sort of inspiring as a list of considerations that could drive forward the discussion of a community health hub at Concordia. I think in addition to the list that you gave us, like meaningful work, lifelong learning, safe transportation, a couple other things I would add would be community. I do think a sense of community is really important for health in a broad sense. A sense of belonging, feeling welcome is very important. And also to pick up on a comment that was made earlier, now I can't see everybody's names, but privacy, or maybe I would say autonomy, is also important as a one of many factors determining health. And in terms of my own reason why I'm here, like Steve, I've really inspired by Steve, I've become very attached to oral history as a method, and this has brought me to do some research projects over the last few years. They're still going on right now. One is on spaces of alternative justice. So transitional and restorative justice. What are the spaces that are needed, that have been used for such practices? And one of the themes that is coming through in the interviews that we're doing on that project is the value of landscape, broadly defined gardens, other kinds of healing spaces, urban ecology for sure. So I've been thinking a lot about the capacity of organic landscapes as agents in both individual well-being, but also restoration in the sense of justice or political restoration. And another project I'm doing is on the urban knowledge of older citizens in Montreal. And we've interviewed about 100 people so far, people mostly over 70, about their knowledge of the city. But, through that, we've really, of course, during the pandemic as well, some of the things that have really come to the foreground is how older people are really forgotten in most discourses related to the urban. And so that's one of the reasons I'm here today, is that I think that age or aging populations is a crucial thing for the community hub to explore, because if nothing else, because older citizens are going to be the majority of the population by within the decade. And then last, so I'm thinking about age. I think gender is always a consideration, and I'm just mentioning it because it hasn't been said yet. I think it's built into any kind of holistic view of health, that we have to look at how differently gendered bodies are receiving or benefiting from healthcare differently. It's, many medical studies are still done with the male body as the kind of defining supposedly universal test subject, but that means that women's health often is secondary. But then what about trans health? What about non-binary gender health? It's very challenging to receive supportive health care, even in Canada, even in a comparatively enlightened place like Canada. And then last but not least, I think that the community health hub really needs to think about Indigenous health, because, and I'm sure it's out there somewhere in the discussions, maybe it's already been talked about in another one of these sessions, but, as Steve was saying, universal healthcare is, or I'm paraphrasing, universal healthcare is not universal in Canada. I mean, if so many First Nations do not have clean drinking water. So what are we talking about when we're talking about health? Like, that's got to be the basic human rights issues are so much tied to health questions. So age, gender, indigeneity would be my things that I would want the community health hub to be addressing, as well as the other things that have been raised. And for my own self, I would be thinking about, I'm really interested in how landscapes of different kinds can serve as vehicles for healing or restoration at the individual level, community level, and also the environmental level.
Thank you for that, Cynthia. Yeah. Janice?
Hi, I'm really enjoying the breadth of this conversation. So often we end up siloing so much of not just all these conversations, but ourselves to fit into whatever paradigm we're addressing. But this one is vast, includes everyone, and everyone's input is certainly necessary. I really do agree with the voices that are speaking for people who are not heard from very often. I think that we need to be able to have social infrastructures that really are available to mobilize citizens, all citizens that would have access. My work in the creative arts has been through the Art Hives network, and it is one model that has been successful to being able to establish small spaces, small third spaces, public home places. We have a lot of names for them that are self-generating. So we now have over 200 sites that can mobilize together if needed. And this is not new. My greatest research is always in history, because we already have these tremendous models that we just need to remember and bring forward, and to remember that they come from multiple knowledges. So, the arts being one of the crucial languages that we all can connect through, as well as different groups of people. The women prior to the civil rights movement, it's one of my favorite groups of people to really think about, the Southern settlement house movement, where the power was distributed from the university into the communities, so that small spaces of caring for each other could be established and mobilized when needed for bigger things like the civil rights movement. My own research has been primarily with the art hives. I really refused traditional research platforms for a very long time, because I didn't feel like it really brought the voices that I wanted to expand to the forefront without compromising them. So I worked a lot with people living homeless, and they were my greatest teachers. I mean, they were the ones that had the greatest knowledge about survival. So I go back to them very often for information. So the archives is one, and then more recently with colleagues here at the table, the Engaged Living Lab Creative, which has started out in the mall and tried to get going, spent 2 months, back and forth in and out of being in public spaces because of the pandemic, which brought to light not only the issue we were addressing, which was the great social isolation that people in the older years experience, but then what happens when you add a pandemic to that, and suddenly the older adults become the knowledge keepers of how to handle that and how to survive that, and how do you mobilize that into the community. So these are some of my areas of study. I'm also very interested in investigating the mental health care gaps that we have now that have been totally multiplied because of the pandemic, and working with family physicians to understand how public practice aspects of the arts, especially art therapy, can be given back to the people to use themselves to maintain creative spaces for engagement. So we're working right now with looking at how art therapy can be used in a non-clinical way to address issues of depression, anxiety, as well as social isolation. So I think that most importantly is that we need to go back to the people who have lived their lives, all people who are living their lives, to find out what's working for them and to bring that forward, because I do think we have the answers. It's just that the university doesn't really know how to reach the answers, because they're really mobilized in people, not in my opinion, not in nonprofit organizations, although they do a great deal, of course, of good, but they're not the main target that I think is necessary to really understand what works for people. So looking at community-defined evidence as the vehicle to bridge to the university for a conversation that can continue on. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thanks so much, Jana, Cynthia, Megan, Stephen, everyone. I mean, we'll keep moving and we'll keep posing questions to you, but I just want to say one thing I find very exciting is the idea that this component of this new school is still very much in formation. And one thing I take inspiration from in the work you're all doing and describing is how grounded it is and no nonsense it is, and how the knowledge that is being made or that is being sent out into the world is in the case of oral history, for example, or art workshops, is very concrete and is coming from people, or in the case of Cynthia's work with elders and their knowledge of the city. That's the kind of concrete connection that I think this thing can be known for and can support. And that's, I mean, I'll go back to Stephen's sort of warm and fuzzy cautionary comment. We need to be very clear on how this new entity can be, very concretely out in the world, very grounded. And I'm also inspired by Janice's sort of non-institutional way of citing community-based work. So those are just a few thoughts. That's great. Ursula has joined us.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry for being late, coming from another meeting. Yeah, really interesting to hear, and also your observations. I mean, what I took from it was, in addition to this sort of very bottom-up, ground-level work, I also found it very political. I mean, and I really like that part as well. I mean, the political policy elements on health, because it's much more systemic. It's a much more systemic view on health. I mean, on the analysis side, but also on the solutions. I mean, what are the structural problems in our society, in our built infrastructure, in the living conditions, and what Cynthia mentioned about the landscapes and spatial structures, and how that impacts health. I find that's probably another domain, I would say. It's another theme of which I find really, really interesting. Thank you.
Could we go on to the next question? Because we have a few questions, and now that we have a very good idea from everybody here who's spoken, and where your work is all very relevant to this community health, and would be amazing if somehow they can all concretize in the community health hub. The second question we have is, okay, so the community health hub is planned to house an interdisciplinary PhD. So what curriculum or research programs can we envision, given that we have this vast variety of concrete ways and methods and approaches and ways of connecting with community and dealing with community health? What kind of PhD curriculum can we envision? And I'm just going to put that together with another question, because it's hard to do these silos. So the other question I would ask at the same time is, well, how could we also envision a school and a research hub that makes meaningful connections with communities, and also amongst all of this work that is being done right now? Cynthia mentioned gender, indigenous, and age-related questions. Then Megan talked about policy, and Janice talked about marginalized and aging populations that have been ignored, and how these creative practices help them through their own health questions, et cetera, et cetera. So the question is first, how can we envision research programs and curriculum? And also, how can we envision the connections amongst these different research projects and communities themselves? So for example, okay, I'm just going to put it up there. So for example, maybe we can have a PhD or on for example, urban ecology related to age, indigenous, and gender, in terms of these landscapes that Cynthia was talking about, these landscapes of healing, these healing spaces. So maybe there's a PhD that could be thought through in that area that brings together these normally wouldn't come together, but for sure there's tons of connections in terms of health and citizens and urban ecology and biodiversity that could help each other. So I'm just putting it up there as a potential one, but maybe there's lots of other connections that we can be thinking about here.
Mohsen, I think, has a hand, and Carly has a hand.
Good. Okay, so who was first? Mohsen? I guess Mohsen was first.
And Carly, I'm not sure who was first, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Mohsen according to my list.
Mohsen was first. Go ahead.
All right. So if I want to think of a way to connect the issues raised by other people in previous question, from my background and perspective, which is technology, analytics, machine learning, data mining. So a theme that will connect these ethical issues such as justice, or thinking about minorities, marginalized people or communities, or indigenous people. In machine learning, these days we have started thinking about responsible AI. So we are trying to put the society in as the main stakeholder, and thinking about society rather than just thinking about big tech companies' profit or I don't know, the majority of people instead of the society as a whole. So I think in terms of technology, responsible technology could be a theme that can connect and address all of these ethical or sometimes legal. We didn't talk about legal aspects or regulations that are needed to govern and control these issues that we are talking about. But talking about responsible research or responsible technology, maybe a theme that we can think about, and then think of research projects that can be used or can be defined to address these using scientific methodology.
Carly, would you like
Okay.
go for
I'm hearing
it?
some weird feedback. Hopefully it's clearer on your.
Is your mic on or your sound on? No. Keep trying, Carly. I think
Okay,
it's okay.
I'll try again.
Could that be? Huh.
Someone's mic is on that isn't mine.
You're not on Zoom, yeah. Okay, I think Doug's on it. Okay.
All right, let's try again.
Did I mute my mic?
Okay, I think this sounds better. It sounds better from my.
It's better. Oh, no.
I'm muted. I'm muted.
Do you want to try now, Carly?
Okay, if I
Much
try
better.
again.
Much better. Thank you, Doug.
This sounds better. Okay, thank you to Doug and Anna for rescuing us there. I have, I guess, more of a question than a solution to how we train students, and that is, what would make this PhD through the School of Health kind of, I guess, qualitatively different than the regular indie program that already exists? So is this just, doing an indie PhD, but with researchers who are involved in the School of Health, or are we actually envisioning creation of some kind of different curriculum, or maybe, a cohort of a cohort of School of Health students who would work together in some way, or have some kind of a, shared seminar or curriculum that would bring them together? Because otherwise it seems like it would just be the existing indie program that we have, which can work great, but can also result in students kind of falling through the cracks because they're trying to balance between, three very different disciplines. And so I wonder if having some kind of School of Health centric, whether it's cohort based or whether there's some kind of, seminar or class that they all take together to kind of establish some common ground is needed in this case.
Can I?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, first of all, Stephen Hyde did bring a hint to that answer, which I tend to agree in the chat. in that the PhD is, and Carla, you even mentioned it, the idea of having a cohort of people, of students, is so significant to bring these students together, number one. Number two, Stephen High said it very well, is that the PhD too would help connect the people that are working, the faculty that is working on these issues, and finally have an approach to connect these profs together. Because yes, the indie exists, but it's a very, the students that enter the program are so diverse, and that pulling kind of a small portion of them out that are related to health is, to me, the idea of having that school would bring these research programs that have been dealt with very separately together, and kind of enable them to, it's like an enabler for me, for having the faculty work together, but also for the students to kind of, there's kind of a cross fertility that takes place when they're working together very closely, especially if they're a cohort. We know that, for example, in the MDes, I know it's in the MDes, the cohort that comes together, they work really well together. So the idea of a cohort is really nice. So for me, that's the idea. Oh, sorry. For me, that's the, that would be the, one of the reasons to have such a PhD program that brings together these different faculty and students together, But I get the question, because Indy does already allow that to happen, but it's fast. You see it too, right? Like with your own student. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. I think that having a cohort that has some kind of shared activities or something would be really beneficial. I know when I was a PhD student, I took a class my first semester that was basically, I was in Wisconsin, and it was kind of like ecology at Wisconsin, and we had this rotating cast of professors that would come in and give one lecture on, here's my topic and what I do. The next one would come in and say, okay, here's my topic and what I do. And it was really nice. Obviously, it was within ecology, but I could envision something where, for that cohort, they go through a class together where, I come in, I talk about urban, environmental determinants of health and green space. And then Cynthia comes in and talks about, aging in the city and importance of those oral histories and stories. And then Pierre Gauthier comes in and talks about transportation, or they get kind of a smattering of here's what's happening in the Concordia health, ecosystem, and how you can kind of tap into those different subjects. And that would help us learn right now, it's oh yeah, I didn't know we had someone that did that. So knowing who did what and building some of those connections might be nice.
Okay. I just want to say quick, Carly, thank you for raising that, and Steve also in the chat. I think that's I think it's essential, and I'm glad that you're raising it. It was raised in our previous meeting, and there have been some concerns, I think, that the School of Health kind of is going to want to build off an indie or humanities model that leaves the students sort of knocking on doors or finding their own way through the university. And I think it's important for us to say back and to articulate something that's a little more structured, and that gives these different hubs in the school, or the school itself, a program with some center, with some grounding, with a sense of cohort, as you say. That's how collaborative relationships start between PhD students and each other, between students and faculty. I think it's really critical. So we'll certainly be emphasizing that in what we write at the end of these meetings. Ursula.
Yeah, just a little
And then
little comment. If you're talking about one PhD program, then it probably needs to be, if you're talking about a program within the community health hub, then it needs to be probably much broader than urban ecology, for example, or infrastructure. So then it would, unless there's two programs, then one could be more infrastructure related and the other one more around social justice or whatever. But I think I think that's one thing to maybe first clarify, and I guess it will be one, because there will be different hubs in the school, and probably start with one hub, one PhD program per hub, as I see it. And so in that sense, it would be good. All the aspects that we discussed already would probably result in some kind of graduate course offer that would define that PhD program.
I mean, I would just say, I think it's up to us as a larger community to articulate why we think course offerings are going to be important. And again, not just grad students with supervisory teams, but shared coursework. And I love the Carly's model of, when I was a student, it was called a pro seminar, where you had a seminar of the cohort and different faculty coming in to present their work, and you sort of you took a topic and learned it from many different angles. It's one of the most rich forms I can think of. So I mean, it's just one model, but it's great for us to have these different propositions to put down in writing and say back to the team that's going to be putting together the school, and the new dean who is going to be hired. I guess that search is ongoing now. So this is, hopefully will be landing on the desk of the new dean as they come in.
I think Janice had her hand up.
Oh yeah, just say thank you, Stephen, for coming. I know you have to head out, but really appreciate you being here.
Great to see you, Steve. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think in order for the university to stay relevant, we really need to touch and embrace a larger group of people, which to me are the undergrad students. I worked in a very privileged program for a long time. I had 13 students in a beautiful 2-year cohort, and I found it too privileged personally. I found like the information with the world in the state it's in needed so much more rapidly, with so many more people included, that I chose to teach in FAFAR. And so I had, instead of 13 students in the 70s, 70 students at a time, I found that, and they were cross-listed. So there could be PhD students, there could be undergrads. But to me, this is where the university's got to do their focus, not just students, but also inviting community members to be a part of our courses. I think we have to really open the doors to the knowledge, and also assume that those students come with great knowledge, that it's almost ridiculous to think that PhD students have more knowledge than an entering bachelor's student. In this day and age, we can't really afford to do that anymore. So I think that the idea of expanding who we are offering our coursework to, and to invite them into not only the ideas of how empathy for each other, or self-care as you traverse this university experience, but the idea of that there's other ways of learning besides just a cognitive way of learning, to share the methodologies of the creative arts. I mean, there's so much that could help protect students as they navigate not only the university, but the world as we are learning to a new way.
Thanks, that's great. I mean, oh, Cynthia, I see.
You can go ahead, Mark.
Oh, I'm talking too much. You go ahead.
Well, I really loved what Janice just said, I have to say. I was thinking about the PhD in this conversation before that. Carly, thank you for initiating that. Why do we need another one? What would make it different? One of the things I was thinking about it was that, our interdisciplinary programs really ask the students enrolled to think about interdisciplinarity in relation to their research. or how their research is interdisciplinarity, how to kind of defend it or define it as interdisciplinary. And I guess I would see a PhD in this School of Health as being different from that. And how? So the main thing I was thinking about was methodology. And just listening to everyone speak today, I could imagine a PhD that would be grounded in 3 areas. So the first would be community-defined evidence, to use Janice's great expression. The second would be qualitative methods. So first, community-defined evidence, so that could bring in things like participant-led research. That could be a way to really involve, I think this is paramount, to involve the people that we're talking about at the forefront of the research project, to allow the people that we're talking about to actually be the main spokespeople, the main leaders, and introducing students to methods that could let that happen, like really that are designed to foster that, I think would be essential. So participant-led research, arts-based methods in community, oral history for sure. There's probably others, but those are the 3 that come to mind. And then qualitative methods, ways of measuring determinants of health seems very important. This is a way to call upon the expertise. We've already heard great things today, urban ecologists, infrastructure, pollution, these are things that have a lot of data attached to them that, students will want to learn how to gather and assess that data themselves. But then also a section on qualitative methods. And that's where I could see, courses or lectures or units on, let's say, health as justice, health as accessibility, health as decolonization, health as practices of self-care, the healing landscape, so that they're, we have a holistic view of what health and well-being is in the overall, community health hub or the overall School of Health initiative, but that the doctorate would also reflect that holistic that holistic nature as well. And then just one thought on what Janice was saying about how it's important to bring students of different levels together, and I couldn't agree more. Sometimes it's challenging within the structures that we've got. One idea would be the graduate certificate or the graduate diploma. These are 1-year things that somebody who's just out of their undergrad could do, and somebody who's done the PhD or is going into the PhD, let's say they want to do a graduate certificate in community-defined evidence for health. Wouldn't that be amazing, a 1-year program? That's a lot of work to plan, but it could be tied to the existing curriculum of a PhD and draw from, again, the same points of expertise in the university. But I really like the idea that the PhD would come out of the faculty who are already at Concordia, like really draw on those situated resources, but at the same time, put Concordia's traditional mandate right at the fore, which is to be a community embedded institution and make that part of the kind of principal value of the doctorate.
Wow, so well said.
Glad we're recording this so we can go back and carefully notate that. Yeah, no, thank you, Cynthia. That's really great. And I agree, the grad certificates are a great model, including they can be done in conjunction with master's programs, or as you said, immediately after an undergrad degree. They're flexible and light. So I think it's a great model to think about. Gilbert.
Yeah, thank you. I have the experience of PhD in communications, and one thing that is important that I remember about it is that of course, it's interdisciplinary, but the disciplines disappear behind the idea that it's a field. It's a topic that is of interest. Cynthia's intervention was interesting, but what I retain from that is that I would try to avoid the pre-categorization into qualitative, quantitative, sociology, or individual or discipline aspects. We're not there to grow a discipline. We're not producing new professionals like doctors and physicians, and nurses. We're not specializing people into some aspects of the profession that are existing in the health and the social services for that. This is ideas, and but my point is really to look at it from different perspective of lookouts. The ecological one being maybe the focus of what they are. So this the relation between society or the possibility to be healthy with the environment included. We should think through that about the epidemics, how they are threatening people. Even for if we think of a huge epidemic that was in IT at some point, when it became under control, HIV was at 2% of the population being infected. And so it's something, health is something that we should think of some small numbers when we look at the general society can be very important for the future of the society. And so that's a dimension, but it could be very much more narrowed to specific sickness or the rare sickness that are never studied and that are not searched on and things like that. It could be about the vulnerabilities of people. So these are different angles that we look, and not necessarily disciplines, and not something these are things, in fact, that bridge between disciplines and bridge between techniques and approach of methods and even ethics different perspectives.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. I see Mosan.
Yes.
And then Robin.
Oh, Robin knew. We can't hear you, Mosen.
Should I go first or Robin?
Sure, and then Robin.
All right. So trying to connect what Cynthia mentioned about the holistic aspect of health, and also thinking about Gilbert's comment about the levels of health. Something that came to my mind is maybe thinking about a master program of healthcare management, because if it is multidisciplinary and it has different levels, so management of healthcare is going to be very important, and then maybe having students specialize in that discipline would be interesting.
Sorry, in the discipline of health management.
Healthcare management.
Yeah, great.
Hi, everyone. My name is Robin. Thank you for this event and this conversation. I'm actually a master's student at SFU's Urban Studies program. And I'm sorry, I think I misunderstood the context of this conversation and the specific purpose, but I wanted to add something really quickly. And also, unfortunately, I have to leave early. And I felt like if I didn't say anything, I would kind of be spying.
Welcome. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks. So I'm also, what kind of led me to this event is I'm a research assistant with the Hey Neighbor Collective, which is a multi-stakeholder group in Vancouver that studies social connection and isolation and relationships in multi-unit housing in Vancouver. And so I've been working closely with different nonprofit housing providers and talking to residents about their experiences on social relationships and connections and things like that. And we have a research team within the Hey Neighbor Collective that's comprised of a couple of research assistants in geography and urban studies, and professors in gerontology, public health, and urban studies. And so kind of what we've been trying to do is also connect what we're doing to larger research, what other universities are doing, and where our research kind of fits in, and thinking of other research questions, which led me to this event. And so, yeah, I think it's been really great to hear what everyone has to say. And thank you again for having me. And with the student kind of perspective, it's also really amazing to hear instructors talk about student experiences and consider their learning in a really holistic way. So thanks again. And I hope I can perhaps join future conversations.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I just ask, would you mind just emailing or sending some information about, is it Haymaker Collective? Is that,
it's called Hey Neighbor Collective.
Hey Neighbor, sorry. If you could just send a link or information. Part of what we're doing here, and through this process of organizing these meetings, people who can't attend or who aren't showing up because they're teaching now or whatever, have been sending links, articles they've written, ideas just typed into emails. So we're keeping everything, we're gathering everything, we're making sort of a bibliography and a bunch of appendices to this report that we're gonna do at the, put out in May. So we wanna include both, not just the name of the housing justice work, the organization that you're working with, but the model. It's really useful for us to, know how you're organized. So thank you.
Can I maybe add a question because you know the urban studies program, being a student there. So if you could, you sort of off the top of your head say, if we're thinking about a health related graduate program, what would be your input to that? Or would you say, what you're doing is perfectly fine in urban studies, there doesn't need to be an extra dimension that's more specifically related to health questions? It would be good if you could just, from your experience of say, I would have wished to see more of whatever, of a component that we could now create. Because that's the beauty of it. We create something new. So if you could give us some idea of what you would like to see in such a program, would be interesting.
Sure, I'll try my best. I think one of the pros and also challenges of the program is because it's so interdisciplinary and there's a lot of overlap. So really a lot of what's been discussed today are really parallel to, I feel like, conversations that are happening within SFU urban studies as well. I'm not sure, I don't have a lot of, I'm not sure what to add on the kind of public health component as much, but I know that SFU Urban Studies also has their diploma program, which they've been running for a while now. Yeah, it didn't really answer your question, but if I think of something, I can add it in the chat.
Thanks.
So I think Mosen has your hand. Mosen, do you have your hand up again?
Yes, so answering that question, what I really want, or I'm interested to see is some studies investigating the impact of health on sustainable development. So I haven't seen that many, but I think it could be interesting to research that. I think the best place for that is the School of Health, right? To see what are the impact of health on sustainable development in different countries, developed countries, developing countries. So that would attract my attention.
Can I respond?
Yeah.
Hi, Mosen. That's very interesting how you're bringing that, because even at the Cities Institute, we talk a lot about how urban infrastructure, urban form, morphology, the quality of buildings, materials, spatial qualities, etc., how all of that has an impact on health. Okay, so the thing is, so in terms of whether it's physical health or whether it's questions which we've seen in the past 2 years of isolation and mental stress. And so we've seen that how intimately related the built environment is with human and community health. And in fact, we've even seen the explosion of public health use, in other words, green spaces and parks, the explosion of that just to deal with the mental stress that people were going through and communities were going through throughout the pandemic and the isolation that we were forced to be part, to experience. So, so I'm just trying to put that out there, saying that yes, of course, it would be super interesting to have a kind of focus on the community health related to, because of course, but I also think that both institutions eventually will work closely together, in terms of, developing large projects, with these questions, national and international projects, because it's what you're saying is so spot on. We talk about it all the time, but at the same time, I think that it can't only stay in the School of Health. Eventually, it's got to. Even that has to be more holistic. There's going to be a bigger picture on top of that too. Anyways, I wanted to add that, Mosen. Thank you for that. There is one more question that we can be asking. If we want to just move along, because we have about another little bit. So we do have another question. How might the hub serve as a center for community-facing events and education? I mean, we've already talked a lot about how a lot of us here are working to develop already tons of community events, but how might the hub itself, the Community Health Hub, serve as a center for community-facing events and education? A bit like the fourth space does, I would say, in a general basis, but specifically to community-facing events and education related to community health. Some of you are already doing that, but how
certainly Janice has addressed that in her, both in today and in her work.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I guess I would like to just say one thing about that. It should be, it's fourth space, but in reverse. It's not about what we're going to send out. It's what we're going to receive and making a space for that. And I don't think the university does that well enough. Not if we're not inviting community to come back before students come back. I mean, like all the things with the pandemic that has shown us that we are really pretty much an island, and for good reason sometimes. But I think that's why we need a lot of smaller infrastructures that we're supporting to make those voices have comfortable spaces that they can feel like they can share what their knowledge has taught them.
And I think the establishment of the school, I think we're trying to see this as an opportunity to do that and to kind of make the university understand that it's the only way to do or to study or to focus on community health. In fact, we have to develop a different way of being in communities, or we have to support, off-campus work, small-scale work, one-on-one storytelling, and other kinds of research. I think that's critical, that this gets said, as a result of these discussions.
Cynthia, go ahead.
Okay. Just to give support to what Mark, you were just saying, and what Janice was saying too. One of the tenets of community engaged research is that you have to make sure that your research is what a given community wants and needs. And I think a really important way of doing that would be to, for example, to look at some of the research that Concordians and others have done about health issues in Montreal, and then partner with specific health organizations in different neighborhoods, in different communities, and to say, what would be helpful. Ask what would be helpful, because we also don't want to detract or split people's attention between a resource that they really need in a given community setting and our own institutional objectives, right? So it's very hard to do. It's a tall order. But one thing I would say is that, in contrast to the usual approach to institutional infrastructure, which is to build something and make it permanent, there could be a kind of agility to this, in which we say, okay, well, we see there's a particular set of issues in, I don't know, Little Burgundy or or Shaughnessy Village or wherever it might be, and would like to partner for 3 to 5 years with this specific group, and to build up the School of Health's kind of clout and legitimacy in relation to actual on the ground community needs. Mm-hmm. So that would be, just to voice the same thing that Janice is saying, but maybe from a slightly different angle, that I think it would be a real disaster if the School of Health, with one leg of that three-legged stool being in community health, did not substantively engage with community action that's already going on, at least in Montreal, in terms of health and well-being initiatives. And that could be very broad. For example, there's this wonderful organization called Santé Urbaine. I don't know if they're still active, but they were working primarily in the Centre Sud area, sort of gay village, just south of Parc-la-Fontaine. And they were working with landowners who had just, buildings had burned down, but nothing had been built yet. They were working with those landowners just to borrow the land for a year or two and to create these community gardens that were sites where the organization taught former street youth how to grow flowers and vegetables and create like these little beautiful micro ecosystems that contributed to the overall health and well-being and greening of this very urban, gritty, impoverished neighborhood. So, what would it look like for the School of Health at Concordia to sort of partner with and actually support and amplify something like that that's already going on, that would provide such amazing collaborators if once trust was built, So I think like seeing a model for the community and the community hub as something that goes out rather than brings in. I think the bringing in can happen later, after the going out has happened.
Cynthia, can you say again the name of Santé?
Yes, Santé Urbaine. I'll put it in the chat. You know what? I'll look for the website, and I'm hoping they're still functioning, because with all the rampant development in Montreal, even during the pandemic, I'm not sure. But I'll look for their website. I'll put it in the chat. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very helpful to have these concrete examples, and I know there's many more that we can list, should list.
In fact, Megan was working with a few others. Maybe we can share those later. Okay. She had mentioned one in her presentation. Thank you. Well, we don't have any more hands up. So.
Yeah, I'll just say one thing to echo what Janice and Cynthia and others of you have said about the importance of not just community as a kind of buzzword or a sort of generalized term, but as really sort of grounding the school in respect for and sort of collaboration with, and Cynthia used the word amplification of work that's already going on in the community and that's wanted and desired by communities. I think we also need to think about the idea of an interdisciplinary school and the relationship of different researchers to that school. So as well, a community health hub should be useful, and it shouldn't try to sort of overlay a set of concerns or desires onto what we're already doing, but it should also come from the ground up of the researchers. And I think the opportunity is to get people talking to each other and to figuring out how we use language, sometimes the same language, to mean different things. So who's using the word landscape, who's using the word ecology, and what's meant in different, a social media ecology versus a biological ecology, just to take a very crude example. In my field, the word that is everywhere and nowhere is performance. So there's, the term performance is used in corporate culture, it's used in theater and dance, it's used, in all kinds of contexts, in visual art. What's exciting and interesting is when we get together and we don't know how our colleagues are using the same terms. So I think that's maybe a role that a school of this sort or a hub of this sort can fulfill, is sort of bringing together people around the differences inherent in their work. Other thoughts or contributions? I know it's a busy Wednesday afternoon in the middle of February. We're pulled in many directions, so we very much appreciate the gift of your time today.
And I do have to say that the discussion was really interesting and broad and generous, so thank you.
Last chance for final words, or we'll bring it to a close.
I could just say, thank you everybody for, for having these sessions and for inviting our feedback. I think it's a super important approach to this and very inclusive. So, and it's your time as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Okay, thanks. Thanks Ursula and Carmela as well for coming and leading and bringing their expertise, and to the gang here at Fourth Space. We can wrap it. Thanks.
Do you want to say something? No, well, I just want to thank everybody for being part of this conversation. It was much more than I expected, so thank you, because, thank you.
Yeah, from my side as well. I mean, I liked all the ideas. It's very related in a way to what we're trying to do in the city's institute. So, and there won't be a PhD program in the foreseeable future. So I think that this program that is coming up could maybe fill that gap of the city's work around social justice,
health,
politics, health,
community,
and solutions. I mean, sort of systemic, what Govind always says as systemic barriers to sustainability. I think that's a great role, and a very sort of systemic approach, which I really like. So I think there would be a very good and close connection to what we're trying to do in research. And if we can find a home in such a graduate program, it would really help. So thank you.
I'll just close with a word. The next event in this series, we're going to jump over the month of March. The next event will be here at Fourth Space on April 8th. But before then, I just want to invite you all to a kind of an adjacent event that will happen here in Fourth Space, sponsored by the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies in Society and Culture. And that's this Friday at 2 p.m., day after tomorrow. And it's an artist roundtable and series of performances and artist presentations on the performance form known as picture recitation, which is closely related to the development of cartoons and animation. The event is called Picture Recitation and Medical Storytelling. And we're bringing together 3 artists who use this form, which is grounded in painting and performance and storytelling, with hands-on knowledge of the medical profession. So 2 of the performers are also registered nurses. MK Cherviach from Chicago is a cartoonist and does graphic novels on health and medical knowledge. Claire Dolan from Vermont, who will be performing live, does picture-based performances, also on her experience working as a healthcare professional and a nurse. And Priyanka Jain is a PhD student in Melbourne, Australia, who comes from a family of practitioners from India of this picture recitation performance form, and her work concerns neuroscience and medical knowledge as well. So it's a interesting Friday afternoon performance that I think relates to some of the themes we've been talking about. So I hope you can join us.
Thanks, Mark.
Zoom or
And
live, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I did put the link in the chat, and you are more than welcome to come into the space for that project on Friday as well as any event, in fact, that happens here on the Daily. So on that note, we thank you for those of you who joined us, audience members and panelists in the space today. Those of you who joined us via Zoom, we so much appreciate your participation. It's been great to hear from all of you. And now you've got me thinking about fourth space in reverse. So thanks, Janice, for that. And yeah, folks who are watching the live stream, we appreciate you being able to visit the conversation in this way. And I'll remind all of you that that is available there on the Fourth Space YouTube channel if you'd like to visit it and subscribe. To our interpreters, a big shout out as well. Thank you for joining us today and doing all this important work with us. Thank you. Okay, we're going to close up the Zoom, everybody. See you next time. Bye.